Hello grade 3s, welcome to our third life skills lesson. Now this week we're going to learn about a timeline. Do you know what is a timeline? Let's look at a timeline. Do you see a timeline has a long line with lines on it where they write the years. At the top they also show pictures about the timeline. Now, if we look very carefully, from the first part, we can see the first year is 2004. 2004, in this timeline, Mbali was a baby. When we look at 2005, Mbali was 2 years old. And so on. Pause the video and look very carefully at everything happening in this timeline. Then you may continue with the video. Now that you looked at the timeline very carefully, let's answer a few questions. Question number 1. When was Mbali born? Can you tell me? Pause the video and think very carefully about your answer. Now, if you look very carefully, can you just say which year it is? Can you just go guess it? No, we need to find some clues. So, the first part says that Mbali was a baby, but it doesn't say when she was born. If you look at the second part, it tells us in 2005, Mbali was 2 years old. So, remember, when you are born, you are 0 years old because your birthday starts from when you are born. So, a year later, you are 1 year old. 2 years later, you are 2 years old. So, we need to go back 2 years. So, just like counting back, 2005, 2004, so Mbali was born in 2003. Now let's look at the second question. How old was Mbali in 2012? Pause the video, look for clues, and think about what is your answer. So how old was Mbali in 2012? Now, if we look at a timeline, we see 2012 is over year on the timeline. And then if we look at the top at what it says at that line, then it says in 2012, Mbali was 9 years old. Now for the third question. How old was Mbali when she could eat by herself? And the second part of the question says, what year was that? Pause the video, look very carefully for your answer, and then we'll continue. Now for this question, you had to follow the clues of the pictures. As you can see in the first picture, she's still a baby. So, she couldn't have eaten by herself when she was a baby. In the second picture, we can see that her mom is feeding her. So at 2 years old, she could still not eat by herself. Then the next picture, her dad is still helping her with her shoes. So she's still receiving help from her parents. Then at the fourth picture, we can see that Mbali is eating by herself. So how old was she when she started to eat by herself, or when she could eat by herself? If we look right underneath the picture, it says at 5 years old. So the first answer for our question was she could start eating by herself at 5 years old. Now the second part of our question was, what year was that? Now remember, a timeline works like this. There where you see the line, the picture fits with that line. And underneath that line is the date. So, Mbali could eat by herself at 5 years old, and she was 5 years old in 2008. Question number 4. In what year was Mbali 7 years old? Pause the video, look very carefully, and then we'll continue. Now, this time, your clue was in the words. Mbali was 7 years old in 2010. Could you find it? If you did, well done. Otherwise, you must practice this a bit. Ask your parents or your guardians or your siblings to ask you questions about this timeline, and then see if you can answer them correctly. And the last question for the life skills is answer questions 1 to 4 about yourself. So question 1, when were you born? Question 2, how old were you in 2012? Question 3, how old were you when you could eat by yourself, and what year was that? And the last question, in which year were you 7 years old? Pause the video and answer these questions. If you do not have the answer to them, then ask your parents or your guardians or your siblings if they remember when you were born, how old you were in 2012, and so on. Now for the writing part for today's life skills work, open up your life skills book on the following page. Remember, before we start with any of the work, we first need to write our date. Do you know what is today's date? Today is 27 January. Please write it at the top. Now, let's discuss 3 questions. How far back can you remember? Can you remember when you were 1 year old, or 2, or 3? When is the last thing or the earliest thing that you can remember? And what did you do, or what did you say, or what did you hear? What do you remember the furthest back from when you were born? Second question, can you remember your second birthday? Do you know what you did, or what you ate, or what theme it was? And then the last question, can you remember starting school? Do you remember when you came to school the first time as grade 1? How did you find it? Was it scary? Was it exciting? Were you happy, sad, angry? What did you see? What did you remember? What did you taste? What did you smell? Can you remember starting school? Now this bottom part, complete it with your guardian, or your mum, or your dad, or your grandpa or grandpa, or your siblings. You must fill in this timeline about yourself. Now there are 4 pictures, but don't worry, it's not to say that you look like that, or you walk like that, or anything like that. Those are just pictures to show you more or less the age. Okay, so the first column, that means the first blocks from top to bottom. Do you see there's a baby? Underneath it, it says, I was born in. So you must write underneath it, in which month were you born? And then underneath that, in which year were you born? In the second column, it says, I began to talk in. Find out from your parents or your siblings or your guardians which month did you start talking, and also which year. In the third column, I started school in which month and which year. And then the last question. I came to grade 3 in which month and which year? Thank you very much, you guys. I hope you enjoy your day and enjoy your work, and I hope you understand this timeline. Remember, if you do not understand something, go through the video again, and if you still don't understand, then contact your class teacher. Bye-bye.